Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sea Stories. It's great to be here with you. I'm Duncan Hood, and we are doing this on behalf of the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. This is a series where I try and interview interesting people that I have found along the way, and I think we've got a real gem tonight. My friend Tom Lynskey has agreed to come on and talk about really some of the amazing stuff he does. And with that, I'd like to say, hey, Tom, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
I've been seeing about the Chesapeake Schooner race. That's coming up this summer, isn't it?
It's coming up in October, and hold
Yeah.
on to your socks. Here we go.
I might come down for it. That looks like a lot of fun.
Oh, it'd be great fun. We'd love to have you. Absolutely. You're just around the corner in Cape May, so you're getting all this rain like we are, right?
Yeah, pouring rain, gray, overcast right now, and it's gonna be
Nice.
dark, so my lighting's gonna change dramatically in the next hour.
But probably mine will too.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, a few housekeeping things. As we normally do, we will be running a chat screen and we'll be running a Q&A screen. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screens, you should find a little button for chat and for Q&A. Your chat will be seen by both of us as presenters and also by your friends who are still joining us. So if we could, let's see if everything's working. I'm going to type in where I'm signing in from. And if you all would do the same, it'll give us a chance to see if everything is up and running properly. So take a moment and chat, type in where you're signing in from, and it'll be great to see. Harrisburg, another Cape May, Newark, fantastic. Okay. Looks Nova Scotia. How cool is that?
All right.
Williamsport, Suffolk.
I see some familiar names.
Isn't that cool? I love this.
Very
Oh,
nice.
how am I? How am I? Oh, it's beautiful. This is a few slips up. Oh, that's from Dan. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Before we get going, I do want to take a moment to say how much our hearts go out and how so terribly upset we are about the Cuauhtémoc Mexican tall ship accident up in New York at the Brooklyn Bridge. And there's just nothing we can say, but it's a terrible, terrible accident. And we feel so deeply for both the crew and their families. So, with that said, all right, Tom, I have been on and off your site for a couple, 2 or 3 weeks now, and I have to say, I am crazy impressed by the cool stuff you do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you find your stories, about how you put them together, and then we'll step into your slideshow when you're ready.
All right. Well, sounds good. Yeah. So, my name is Tom Lynskey, and I have a YouTube channel, which I see a lot of familiar names here, so I know some of you are familiar already. It's called Part-Time Explorer, and I do documentaries about maritime history and exploration. I'm a fellow in the Explorers Club, which is based out of New York City, and it's just a wonderful club of adventurers and archaeologists and explorers. And what I do with my videos in selecting the topics, honestly, I'm kind of overwhelmed with how many topics there are and stories out there that I want to cover. It's really just anything that strikes my interest. Because sometimes I'll do a video that's, not even really in those two categories, but it's just something I wanted to tell, so I'll put that together. But I have over 70 videos that are filmed, just waiting to be edited and put out there. So and then on top of that, there's so many others that I want to film that I'm halfway through writing, that I'm still researching, and it's overwhelming. I almost feel like, I know I don't go looking for new stories. I don't. They sort of just come to me. Some people will suggest it. I'll find it along the way in passing or just out on the road to film something else. And then they just get added to the list. And then I start filming those. So it's kind of going with the flow of stories that interest me and interest my team. And we have a lot on our plate right now that we're working on, in addition to the 70 that are in post-production already.
Yeah, and what gave you the inspiration to start this whole thing? Your recreations are really quite amazing. And what kind of team do you have?
Well, I have been making films my whole life, usually narrative ones. When I was younger, like all through grade school, I would make short films with my friends, like World War II shorts or adventure shorts. And then I started actually getting into game design and software development. And along the way, they were always educational topics. So along the way, I was like, I want to combine my filmmaking passion with these educational subjects that I'm developing with different teams. And that just led to documentaries, to fundraise for those projects. And that has evolved. It started as part-time because I also did government contracts and things like that. It evolved into my mainstay. So it takes up most of my time now. But I still do some of the other stuff on the side. But I've got a wonderful team. We're kind of spread thin because we have a good number of people on our team, but we have so many projects. We're developing an experience, a virtual software museum experience about the RMS Lusitania, and we've been working on that for a few years, and we have a few others in the works. And that is a massive undertaking, but a lot of the same people on that team work on my documentaries. I don't do my animations. We do it in-house. They're original and we make them. We don't contract that out. We don't license them, and it's certainly not AI. But I direct them and I say what I want them to have. And I have some modelers who make the models. A guy named Colin has been doing a lot of the modeling for the animations lately. He might pop into the chat, I don't know. But then doing the animations themselves directly is Alex Muller, who I did see pop up in the chat. So I've got some of my team in here too. He animates them and I kind of just direct him where to go, what to do with the cameras. But he puts quite a bit of his own originality into them. I do the video. The video and editing, filming, writing, research is all me, although we have historians regularly coming in to help out on these topics because I'm not an expert on everything. In fact, in a lot of topics, and I know I'm rambling here, in a lot of topics I go into them knowing very little. And then I research along the way, and then I feel like when the video comes out, I'm an expert. And then the next day I forget all of it. So...
Totally
Yeah.
get that. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's begin your show, and we
Sounds
will
good.
see just what you do and how you do it.
Okay.
Here we go, and we should be seeing your first slide. I'm going to go quiet for a little while, and you just guide us on through, okay?
All right, sounds good. So yeah, my YouTube channel is Part-Time Explorer, and my company that does the YouTube channel and also those virtual experiences and anything else we might dabble into is HFX Studios. Stands for Historical Films and Experiences, but it's a subtle nod to Halifax, which is where my wife is from, and it's where we met. So we recreate history, but we don't just animate it and tell the story from a desk chair, even though literally that's what I do on the camera. But we always go out to the site, we take the cameras to the site, and we don't really like telling a story unless we can get there and see what's left, or talk to locals, or visit artifacts or a museum related to it. It has to be an adventure in telling this story. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, so I covered most of this, but my channel, I have 430,000 subscribers, 65 million views worldwide. I do also talk about ghost towns as well in the exploration. A lot of Wild West ghost towns and things like that. Towns lost in the woods. And it's always especially fun when they cross over into maritime history. There's been a lot of ships that connected to a ghost town, and we ended up exploring stories of both. We do our animations, and we always approach the subjects with the idea in mind that we might be the only person to ever tell this story. We sometimes tackle big ones where everyone knows the story, and certainly we're not the only people telling that story. But certain ones, like the Indian, or the Gleneslin, or the Hungarian, which we're going into, we're probably going to be the only ones telling that story. So we feel the weight of that, where we have to do it right. Because if we're wrong, or if we exaggerate, we sensationalize, or we're careless with our research, when we say something, it just became a fact. It might be wrong, but if this is going to be the source that people go to learn about it, it's going to be repeated to no end. So we feel that responsibility. So we always try to do this definitively, thoroughly, and we consult people much smarter than us to help us with doing it right. So that's why we partner with museums and historical societies as often as we can. And we talk to them, and we use it as a way to get them exposure. They help us make sure the story is right, which they want to do to begin with, but then we publicize them. We push them, we put them out there, we get a lot of people coming in and donating to them and supporting them, joining their membership, visiting the museums. We did a documentary with the Milwaukee Clipper on Lake Michigan in Muskegon, and they got volunteers and they got donations and they got some support thanks to the project that we did with them. There's been a lot of museums that have boomed thanks to us working with them, and we just have a lot of fun doing it. So in this presentation, we're going to be focusing on two different things. I've picked 4 stories from my channel, and we're going to focus on what is there now, like what, if we go to visit the sites relevant to it, what can we find? And then the second part is recreating it. You know, with each one of these animations that we do, we very often, when we sit down with a historian, we give that historian the opportunity to see that story in 3D from all sorts of angles for the first time ever, usually. And that makes them rethink a lot of the stories that have been taken for granted since the event actually took place. For example, we're going to get into the Lusitania a little bit later, but it has always commonly been said 18 minutes is how long it took her to sink. 18 minutes of terror is the overused title that they always say about the sinking. But in doing our 3D with historians, we found 18 minutes is impossible, and it took longer. So we learn things about the subject. Historians learn things about the subject in the production of these documentaries, which is one of the reasons why they take so long. So, and we try to focus on stories that are lesser known, while also indulging in the ones commonly told and trying to clear up misconceptions along the way. So let's jump on over to the next slide. All right, so the first of the 4 stories, 4.5, that we're going to be talking about in this is the SS Atlantic. And let's jump on over to the next slide, which is the intro to my documentary.
The biggest, grandest, and finest ocean liner just crashed on the rocks of a rural village in Nova Scotia, with nearly 1,000 people on board. The ship is rapidly breaking apart, with every lifeboat a death trap. Disobedient officers, panicking passengers, and an icy, raging sea wreak havoc. The rescue of these people come down to a handful of poor local fishermen and their families. What do they do?
So the SS Atlantic was a White Star liner. That's the same company that owned the legendary Titanic about 40 years later. She was built in 1871 by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, which also built the Titanic. 421 feet long, a gross tonnage of 3,707, and it was on her 19th voyage that she wrecked. So a really quick synopsis. If you want to learn about these, I'm not really going to go too much into the history, because you could watch the video and learn it far better than I can remember. But she was sailing across the Atlantic from Liverpool to Queenstown to New York, technically New Jersey. And along the way, she had been battling storms, burned out her coal reserves, and then had to reroute to Halifax to resupply because it wasn't enough to get to New Jersey. And then along the way, through navigational errors and insubordination by the officer on watch, the SS Atlantic was 12 miles off course and ran right into the rocks of a rural fishing village in Nova Scotia. The ship broke apart, was immediately stuck, broke apart, rolled over. Anywhere between 500 and 550 people died in the sinking, including every single woman on board and all but one child, maybe two. There's a possibility that a second child survived, with 429 survivors who were all men, mostly crew. The wreck today is obliterated. There's very little left. Divers can go down. There's nothing to see on the surface. Divers have dove it, and they'll see a boiler, they'll see some shell plating, and there's the occasional thing concreted into the rocks. But other than that, you don't see a recognizable ship down there. So let's jump on over to the next slide. All right, so one of the things that we did in making the documentary is it was on an island that's off of that fishing village, and we camped there in making the video just for fun, to spend the night there, my future wife and I. And we visited the site, and that middle picture on the top row is the wreck immediately after the sinking in the following days. That rock is still there, that view is still there, but the wreck is long gone, obviously, but we were camped basically right by that rock, sort of where the cameraman is. There are a couple of things on the island that are of interest. In the story of the rescue, they ended up having to run ropes from the ship down to the rocks, and allegedly they wedged a chain into the rocks and attached the rope to it. And I was just strolling out there and found that chain right there. As far as I know, there's no record of that chain existing, having been found. I'm not going to go so far as to say I'm the only person who's ever seen it since then, but it felt like a discovery. It felt like this is something exciting. It confirms a part of the story because it's right where that would have been. And it was just really incredible to see something still there 150 years later. So if you ever visit Halifax, Nova Scotia, this is a story worth looking into. At the bottom right is an excellent book by a friend of mine, Bob Chalk. And in making this documentary, which was heavily based on his work and his book, and he was featured in the documentary, we were able to take a 3D model of the ship that our team built, ram it up onto the rocks in a computer program, accurately recreated rocks, and go through the motions of the ship. And there were a lot of little things that were learned from that, the motions, how certain people couldn't have been able to get off, why certain lifeboats would have been disabled when they were disabled. And this was the first time that an actual proper timeline, as far as I'm aware, had been established down to the minutes, because we were able to put it in 3D and trial and error it until it made sense. Up until then, it was kind of just like, all right, well, it hits approximately at this half hour, it rolls over at approximately this half hour. But that was an example of using CGI to learn more. There's better examples in a little bit. That house in the bottom was the only building that I know of still standing from the time that a rescuer from the wreck lived in. It has sadly been torn down about 5 years ago. And the bottom left is the grave in Halifax, Nova Scotia, of the officer who essentially doomed them all. He was the only officer lost in the sinking, aside from the purser, but he was the only deck officer, and they didn't blame him. He was to blame, but there was an interesting nobility that the rest of the crew of the Atlantic had. They refused to throw their own under the bus. Even though they clearly did not get along, he was the black sheep in the crew, and he was obviously at fault, but the captain didn't blame him, and essentially burdened the blame himself, even though the captain was not at fault. So it was a very interesting bit of nobility. They all chipped in and got him this grave. No, what am I talking about? I'm sorry. That's the purser. That's Purser Ambrose Worthington. The grave of the officer is in that photograph, but he's unmarked. Allegedly he was marked. They all chipped in, but for one reason or another, his stone is gone. I will do a very quick shout out. I saw a name in the chat. I saw John Corbett. He is with the SS Atlantic Heritage Museum up in Nova Scotia, and they continue to preserve the story, and they're open seasonally, and they get a lot of visitors coming in to see the story. And most of those viewers came, I think, because of the documentary and Bob's book. So it's just one of those stories 150 years ago where it feels like everything's gone. But if you dig a little deeper, you can find certain things. You can find that grave down in Halifax. We actually found another grave just this past year that was lost. That is also in Halifax from a passenger who died. And then the chain, there's little traces. So it's just a thrill and an adventure for us to compile all of that into a video and share that with the world, along with telling the story of the disaster. So let's go on to the next slide.
This is a pitch to ask you to join us at the American Schooner Association. Founded in 1972, the American Schooner Association is dedicated to the history, preservation, and promotion of the schooner rig. You don't need to be a schooner owner to join the organization, just to be interested in these beautiful boats. As time marches forward, the role that schooners played in the history of our country is fading too. Your membership helps support educational programs and provides a base for preserving these vessels. So, join us. It's inexpensive, important, and we'd love to have you along. We'll see you at amschooner.net.
Fantastic. I think I'm going to be signing up, by the way.
Love to have you. All right, let's get back to your stories here. We got the
Sure.
coming up.
All right.
How did a fully rigged sailing ship crash against a cliff in the middle of daylight on a perfectly clear day? Well, that's what happened to the Glen Eslyn.
Came ashore at Neocani Mountain in broad daylight and clear weather. Still not clear what caused that, but lots of theories. People that witnessed it said it was almost as if they intended to go ashore, because the ship was in full sail and it just crashed into the mountain.
If you frequent the Oregon coast, chances are you've seen a framed copy of one of these photographs of the Glen Eslyn, still in one piece but grounded hard on the rocks at the foot of Neocani Mountain. Despite how iconic these photographs have become, the story of the wreck of the Glen Eslyn hasn't been explored much beyond a few cursory paragraphs. I'm going to make an attempt to bring this oft-photographed but rarely discussed ship back to life, exploring her successful career and unfortunate demise. But more importantly, I want to see if I can get out to the actual spot that she wrecked, and see if anything at all remains of this 110-year-old shipwreck. I bet she's scattered all over this beach. Sailing ships have a romance. Open ocean, seeing far-off ports. Recounting the story of the wreck of the Glen Eslyn captures this sense of romance and adventure beautifully. So sit back and enjoy this old sea yarn of a beloved ship that outlived her era.
That's the Glen Eslyn. This one is, we made this documentary about 2 years ago, and for a while I felt visually this was our best one, Alex's best animations, and it had just this good feel to it. But I will say we've upped our game in the last few months with quality, so it's starting to look dated already. But yes, as I said in the intro to that documentary, it's a very photographed wreck, and anyone who has been up to Oregon along the coast, if you've stopped in a diner, you've seen a photo of the Glen Eslin. I picked this up out there actually, and there's this, this is her. So it almost bothers me when I see so many photographs. Like when something is so commonly known and yet not known. It's like, here's this iconic ship. Everyone in Oregon has seen photos of it, and I speak generally, of course. But no one can tell me what it is. I've asked people when I was in that diner, I'm like, what is that ship? They don't know the name. Like I said, we partner with museums frequently. The Columbia River Maritime Museum up in Astoria, they know it, obviously. It's one of the ships in their museum. They know it well, and they helped with this documentary. But I feel like if this is supposedly something that's so culturally important to the American Northwest, you gotta know it. So I really wanted to tell it. So the Glen Eslin was built in England in 1885. She was 260 feet long with a gross tonnage of 1,821. And in 1913, she ran aground. She was sailing from Brazil to Oregon. So she was supposed to go south and round the Cape and come on back up. But when she got down to the Cape, the storms were so terrible and so prolonged that they gave up and they went the long way around the world. It turned into a 3-month voyage. And so what's bizarre and somewhat easily explained once you start looking into it is when the ship was sailing up toward, it was going to Portland. I think Portland. It's in the documentary. So it would have to sail up the coast until the Columbia River and turn in. But about 50 miles south or so, and near Manzanita, the ship takes a hard right and goes right into the cliff. Just right into it. And the captain said a sudden fog bank came in, but nobody remembered there actually being fog in the nearby town. It was just bizarre. Everyone was ready to go. They had all of their belongings packed. There were no injured. Well, there was an injury, but no one died, fortunately. And the captain just went into town and got drunk. So it was deemed to be not insurance fraud, but I can almost guarantee you it was. This was the age when sailing ships were in their twilight, past their twilight in some cases. So I think they just had an expensive ship on their hands, and they didn't have the crew to run it for one reason or another. They chose not to scrap it, and they decided this would be more lucrative, just to run her aground. She didn't have any valuable cargo on board, nothing. So, but the story is more complicated than that. It's worth looking into. There's so many fascinating details about the Glen Eslin. Let's jump over to the next slide. So, again, there's a photograph of her at the top. But some cool facts about the Glen Eslin, for example, there was a sailor who started just as a lowly deckhand, and then he would go up in the rigging often. He was just a typical able body on the Glen Eslin. Got his career, got his first sea legs there, and I believe he started at 14. And this was in the earlier days of the Glen Eslin. I think that was like around 1902, so kind of in the midlife of the ship. And then he moved on. He served with the Glen Eslin for a year or two. You learn a lot more about this in the documentary. He moved on with his life, worked his way onto steamships, worked his way up, and eventually became Commodore of Cunard White Star. So that alone I felt would have been worth making this video for, just to tell that remarkable story of somebody who rose from the very bottom all the way up to the very top of one of the most prestigious shipping lines of the era. I think he was in the late 1940s when he was Commodore. But But I didn't know that story until I started looking into that. And then his accounts turned out to be some of the most descriptive of life on board the Glenesslan. And one of the things that he did say, which I think gives so much weight to the love of the sea and the love for these ships that a lot of mariners feel, is he was aboard a White Star Liner. I want to say the Suavik, and it was in port in some far-off corner of the world. And it turns out Glenesslan was in that port too. This was 5 or 6 years after he had left it. He was still some deckhand on the White Star Liner. I can't remember specifically, but he actually got leave from his ship while they were in port, and he went to visit the Glenesslan. They let him spend the day on board, and he just walked along the decks. He held the rails. He took a nap in the sails up in the rigging, he said. But he deeply loved that ship. And he said when he found out, it was a year later, when he found out that the Glenesslan had wrecked, he was heartbroken. He was absolutely heartbroken. For the ship, no one died. He didn't know anybody. He didn't know the guy who broke his arm. It was the ship. He was devastated by that. And it truly is a beautiful ship. So, again, I wanted to know what was there. There's not going to be anything visible. She was, as you see in that photograph, in those photographs, for about a month. They had tied her up. They had armed guards. That's who you see posing with her right in front of the ship there, that were protecting the ship from looters while the investigations were going on. And then after about a month, it broke apart in a storm and fell over. So there wouldn't be any visible, obvious shape of a ship. You very rarely see that in actual wrecks these days. But I wanted to know what was out there, because the people who did know about the Glenesslan, who I had worked with and talked to extensively, said there's nothing left. You won't find pieces, you won't find anything. So I wanted to walk out, and the picture in the middle top is deceiving. It is a half a mile along that very rocky coast. You have to walk the shore down to it, and it is rough. You can get trapped by the tide. So it's important to be careful with your timing, to always be watching your back to make sure if you're going to get cut off, you bail. And of course the rocks, they're not dangerously slippery. You're not going to get pulled out if you're on your guard, but it was still rough getting out there. And to my surprise, there was hull plating. I presume that's hull plating. That might be decking. It's hard to tell, and I didn't have the time to truly look at it, sadly, because it was sunset, and I wanted to get out of there before I lost light. But then there was this other piece, this arm of some sort, that was also almost certainly from the Glenesslan. The riveting pattern was appropriate for the ships of that era. It was in the exact spot that Glenesslan wrecked. It's beyond reasonable doubt that that is the Glenesslan still out there. So that was always, it's always powerful to find something tangible at the site. In a museum, it's one thing, it still has its weight, but to find it, even if it's been found before, even if you're not the first, you feel like the first in that moment. To just uncover it and think, wow, I wasn't expecting this, but this was out here for me. That is a life ring that they had in the they have still in the Columbia River Maritime Museum. They have several artifacts from the wreck, and rather serendipitously, I decided one day to search on eBay for Glenesslan, because I was looking for postcards or something that would just kind of help with imagery of the ship, and I found a couple postcards, but not much. But I found this. And this is, it's a piece of sail. This is sail from the Glenesslan that somebody used a printing press and put this plate on here. But it says, portion of original sail, British ship Glenesslan, aground at Neocony Mountain, Oregon, October 1st, 1913. So I will say, this is just a very quick plug, excuse me, but I have a Patreon where people can give a monthly contribution to just support these films and these explorations. I don't oblige people to do it. I'm more than happy for people to just watch my stuff, and if they are in a comfortable position to support it, I appreciate it. But at my highest tier, I give an artifact away to everyone in that high tier every 3 months. And when I acquired this, which is when I published this documentary, on the back there were a whole bunch of fragments tearing off, little tiny fragments, and I clipped them and gave them out to my highest supporters on there. So they all got a little keepsake from the Glen Estlin as well. And I had just done a documentary, and I apologize if I'm getting long-winded. I had just done this a couple weeks ago, like now, about the aftermath of the Titanic, with the Mackie Bennett and the Minia and the Montmagny and the Algerine, which were sent out to recover the bodies. But they also picked up a lot of debris, a lot of wreck wood, furniture, deck chairs, planking, anything floating from the wreck, they pick it up. And I feel a parallel, almost, to these little artifacts, and wanting to share that with people, and wanting to show it, and wanting to collect it myself. And they received criticism for grave robbing, for morbidly picking things up from the Titanic, but quite honestly, these are sailors. And I say this in the documentary. These are sailors who are taking the same risk of their life as the sailors aboard the Titanic did. Like they have no disrespect for the sea. They're not out there callously saying, "Oh, cool, shipwreck stuff, love it." No, to them, this is a way of making a ship that went down live on, and holding on to that. So I kind of relate to that now in seeing these artifacts and having a few and sharing a few. So let's jump on over to the next slide. All right, so sorry, go ahead.
Here we go.
All right.
On December 13th, 1872, 150 years ago, a ragged, tattered brigantine limped into the port of Gibraltar with a crew of only 3. This was the Mary Celeste, one of the most infamous vessels in history, and had been salvaged by these 3 men from the sailing ship Dei Gratia after the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. What happened to the captain, his family, and the 7 other crewmen on board remains a mystery to this day.
I love it, Tom.
Thanks. So the Mary Celeste is probably the most known of the 4 stories that I'm really going into here, especially among this crowd. I would say people who enjoy sailing ships and maritime history. The Mary Celeste was one that just everybody knows. It's the quintessential ghost ship. But it's also a Nova Scotia story, and I go up there and I do a lot of documentaries on it, on Nova Scotia. So I wanted to tell that story. I'm sure it had been done because of the fame of the Mary Celeste, but I had not seen it. I had not seen just a normal telling of the Mary Celeste. I always see them that are just over-the-top dramatic. Was this paranormal? Was this aliens? Was this some conspiracy? Was it, something like that? I mean, so I wanted to just look at the facts, go to the site, because it was built in Nova Scotia, go to any relevant site that I can and just see what's left, as I usually do, have it recreated, and just say, with a level head and with knowing ships and talking to experts who know ships, what probably happened. So she was built in 1861 in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia. When she was first built, she was called the Amazon. She was later renamed the Mary Celeste. 99 feet long, tonnage of 198. And as I said, her fate is she kind of became a ghost ship, but she continued on after that for many more years until 1885, when she was wrecked for insurance fraud. And they got caught. Nobody ever had a good time with the Mary Celeste. She seemed to be at the center of fraud or mishap the whole time she was at sea. When she first set sail from Spencer's Island, the captain came aboard. Now, she was delivered to Economy, Nova Scotia, and the captain came from Economy, boarded it. Let's jump to the next slide because it's on the next slide. He boarded the Mary Celeste, and this is the first voyage. She was setting sail, I forget where she was going, but did not even get past Nova Scotia. She was sailing along the coasts, and on the first day at sea, the captain dropped dead and turned around, and the ship came back ashore, and that's his grave at the top middle. So Captain McClellan, and we did visit his grave. We always tried to do that. But if you go to the site where she was built, at the top left, you see that stone cairn-shaped monument, and that is a little dedication to the Mary Celeste, just commemorating the history. But very interestingly, on the top right, there are those pilings. And those pilings are from the shipyard that built the Mary Celeste, the Spencer Island Company. And it's hard to say if those timbers are actually from the time of the Celeste, because the Amazon was one of their first, but those are from the same shipyard, which is now long gone. So when the tide goes out, to see something sort of tangible from the wreck, or from the construction of this legendary ghost ship, was very interesting. And at the bottom left, we played with that a little bit. We took the location of those timbers, and I did this profile shot looking straight down the beach, and Alex took the animation of our sailing ship model of the Mary Celeste, and we superimposed it onto it to get an idea of what the Amazon looked like when she was under construction there. So it just feels like this was one of the most mythical maritime stories out there, and sort of be able to give a proper face to it instead of just a legend, and to be able to start looking into it and bring it back to the local community that built it, Spencer's Island. When we visited there, that bottom right photograph is one of several houses that still stand today, are still occupied, that belonged to the owners and the builders of the Mary Celeste. So this was the house of the owner, and he was financing the wreck. She had many owners, but this was the main owner. And apparently, during the construction, he and his family lived on the top floor, and they just let the workers live on the bottom floor. So it was a small community, and they were very, very involved. It was a very tight-knit community where they all worked together, and they built a nice ship that ultimately turned out to not be so nice. So again, we were able to use our CGI to bring the ship back to life. I don't believe it had been properly recreated before. As I said, I know the story had never been properly depicted before, as far as I'm aware. But we were able to work with the Age of Sail Museum up in Nova Scotia, who worked with us to get the shape of the ship correct, and designs right to a sailing ship of the era from that location. So we were able to really just finally give an authentic depiction to one of the main maritime stories of the world, I think. So let's jump on over to the next slide.
Over 200 people are stranded aboard a grounded steamer as hurricane-force winds, blinding snow squalls, and tempestuous seas batter the vessel. The residents of Cape Sable watch from the shore a mile and a half away as the ship slowly breaks apart and is taken away by the rising tide, going down without a single survivor.
And there were people in the mast trying to stay out of the water as the waves were breaching the ship.
The story of the Allen Line steamer Hungarian is not for the faint of heart. It's full of tragedy and horror, but those are shrouded by a complete blanket of mystery. With no survivors, there's no one to tell us what happened on the morning of February 20th, or the 11 days of sailing prior to that. We're traveling to Cape Sable Island and out to the wreck site, collecting archival evidence and local folklore to see what can be pieced together of this mystery dating back over 160 years.
That's just about where they are.
Right here, no stone.
Coming way out on this remote island just to be able to get as close as possible to where the Hungarian wrecked, or where the bodies were coming ashore and where the witnesses watched it from.
We'll be visiting several museums to see firsthand what life aboard this forgotten vessel was like, and bringing the story to life with realistic recreations built off of the ship's original plans. This is the wreck of the Hungarian on Part-Time Explorer.
All right. Yeah, so the Hungarian, again, is one of those stories that was not known, except by a select few, and most of that few are locals up there. Like, if you go to the part of Nova Scotia where this story took place, they all heard of it. It's known. But once you go beyond that, it dies off. So again, that's one of the things I like to do. I love telling those stories more than I love telling the bigger ones, which is a shame because, like, obviously the bigger ones are going to get far more views and help my channel to grow. But I prefer to do what I feel is more interesting and I guess is more important, and that's telling the stories that locals are trying desperately to get out there and keep alive, and just putting that on a global stage. So the SS Hungarian was an Allen liner. She was built in Scotland in 1859. She wrecked in 1860, so it was only about a year that she was out there for. I think less than a year. 298 feet long, which was big for a passenger steel liner at the time, iron. But by standards of just 10 years later, that's not all that big. Tonnage of 2,190, and as I said, she was wrecked in Nova Scotia. She was crossing over from Queenstown to Portland, Maine. Normally, these Allen liners they're mainly a Canadian service between Canada and Britain. Of course, at the time they were one country, but the ships would sail from Britain and go down the St. Lawrence and stop in Quebec, Montreal. But in the winter season, that water is too far north to go. It's too cold, it's too rough. So they actually go down to the United States. They come into Portland, Maine, and there's a rail link that would go from Maine, I think it's the Grand Trunk, up to Montreal. So they were able to still get to Montreal, but they had to take a southern route because of the season. And this was along that southern route, and as she was going off of Nova Scotia, a storm hit. A terrible, blinding storm. She had been battling storms for most of the voyage. We don't know what happened on board. Nobody survived. There's nothing that survived that could really tell us. And in the documentary that we did on it, we looked at all of the evidence that we could find that exists today to see what we could sort of extrapolate. But she was last spotted about 6 hours prior to her wreck, hundreds of miles off course, going the wrong way. She was kind of sailing north. She was supposed to be going to Maine. She should be going, southwest. But instead she was going northeast. So nobody knew why, but she was spotted by a sailing ship called the Signet, off of Liverpool, Nova Scotia in this fog. They spotted her, and there's this one creepy shot that we put in the documentary from the perspective of the Signet in heavy fog around 6 or 7 p.m. And you just see the lights of the mystery steamer. They didn't know it was the Hungarian. It was just this mystery steamer going through the fog in silence except for the foghorn. So we love getting artistic and putting things like that in there that just really build the mood and give character to these wrecks. But that was the last time she was spotted until around midnight at Cape Sable Island, where they saw the steamer, a mystery steamer, stuck on a ledge about a mile or so offshore, horse race ledge. And some time goes by, and then they see it suddenly break off and shoot across the water, much faster than a ship should be able to go, shoots across the water and gets stuck on another ledge. And then over time the lights go out, the mast lamps fall, dawn comes, and the ship is still out there, as you see in this top right picture. That's kind of how she is around the time of dawn. And at the bottom left, can't quite make it out, but people watched from the island's shore. And it's sort of just, I don't know, am I able to just, there? Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
All right, so it's hard to see, but that's where she is in the picture. You can see it better in the video, I'm sorry. And she was lost with all hands. From the point of view of those people in the bottom left picture, earlier, because they had gathered in the middle of the night when it was still pitch black out, and they could see the ship out there, the lights, they couldn't go out. It was 1.5 miles offshore, 1.25 miles, way too rough. And but they lit a beacon. They burned a giant fire of the grass that they could find and some driftwood, threw it into a fire so that if any boats were coming off or somehow someone was swimming ashore, it was a winter storm, so that wasn't likely, they had something to pull towards. No one ever came ashore. So let's go to the next slide here. Of the ones in this list of 4 that we're talking about, this is the most forgotten. Because as I said, it's not known beyond Cape Sable. You won't find it much. If you look in a thick book of Nova Scotia shipwrecks, there's a half a page dedicated to the Hungarian. And yet, around 300 people, up to 300 people were killed. Every single one of them. So this was me. I went out to the site to film. my wife used to join me on these adventures, but as you can see in the bottom picture, we have a little one now. So I fly solo, and she keeps an eye on him. We have a second one as of 2 months ago. But at the time, yes, at the time it was just Tommy down there. So I went out and I met this gentleman at the top left. His name is Hot Dog Johnny. The heaviest Nova Scotia fisherman, lobster fisherman accent that you will ever hear. A wonderful guy, great to talk to, very knowledgeable, a fisherman himself. He knew these waters because he goes out on a fishing boat. He knows the ledges, he knows all of them. He's been out near the wreck. Wonderful wealth of knowledge and a very fun guy to spend time with. I understood 40% of what he said. But it was you who said, was it you who said you hope I recorded him? He's in the video. And I thought about subtitling him, but I didn't know if that was offensive or not. But he took me out on his boat, and we went out to the island, and there's nothing left. You would assume there's nothing left, but there were locals who watched it, and we were able to find the foundations of their homes. Not pictured, but it's in the documentary. So you see in the bottom middle picture, I'm standing there. That's the closest point of land to where the ship went down. That is where they watched from. It's called Black Point. It's the highest point on the island, and it's the closest point to where the ship got stuck. And I was up there, and I like to spend time alone at these sites. I like to just kind of sit there, no camera rolling, for a few minutes at least, and just, say like a quiet thought, like a quiet prayer, if you will, about, the lives who were lost, and just take in the moment and the history. And while I was doing that, I saw this circle in the ground, and that's the top right picture. And it's very hard to see it in a picture. It doesn't show up that well in a video either, but it's about 6 feet across, and it's about 1 or 2 feet deep. It looks like it's lined with a couple of rocks, and it's right at that point. I've camped a whole bunch. I've gone out in the desert. I've camped a lot. It looks like a fire pit. There's no shelter up there. No one would build a fire there. You have the high winds coming in, constantly whipping across there. No one in their right mind is going to build a fire pit up there, unless they had to. I mean, I couldn't think of what else it could be. I called Johnny up. I'm like, what do you think this is? Because there were bits of evidence all throughout the island of just generations of lobster fishermen putting up traps, having lobster catching, I forget what they're called, huts sort of things. You can see those remains there. And a lot of it looks like old remnants of things. So I'd be like, hey Johnny, what do you think that's from? And he's like, oh, it's from a lobster thing. So he was able to discredit quite a bit of things that were jumping out at me. But I pointed to this, and he's like, I don't know what that is. But I think because of the location, because of the clear resemblance to a fire pit, including the rocks being put around it, and the location where nobody in their right mind would put a fire pit, I think that's where they were signaling the Hungarian. And sorry, it was emotional then, and it's kind of emotional now. But on another day when I was out there, I gotta say, it was truly a wonderful community. It was the kind of community where I went to the museum, the museum that's up there, the Barrington Museum Complex, I think is what they call it. And I said, you know, are there any locals I can talk to? And they just gave me an address. And they said, go knock on the door. Which I'm not comfortable with. I don't know. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I prefer to call or send an email and say, hey, I don't like showing up unannounced. But I did. And it was this lovely lady, and she brought me in, she showed me her computer and all of these local stories she had been collecting of all sorts of topics. And she just is like, pulls out a flash drive and she's like, here, I'll give you all this stuff. And then I'm like, well, I'm doing the Hungarian. And she's like, well, let's walk over to the cemetery. I know where the unmarked graves are. And we just walked over and she showed me. I'm like, well, hang on. Let me go to the convenience store. I want to get some roses. We're going to lay them out. And that's what you see at the bottom left. These are unmarked graves. We know of 8 graves from the Hungarian, of 8 bodies that came ashore. And 6 of them are here. They're all unmarked. And the 2 others are elsewhere. But we laid down these 6 roses on where we're pretty sure those graves are. And, you know, it really felt like the story with the least amount of evidence that remains. Until she started saying, oh, well, if you go knock at that door, they have something from the ship. Or if you go knock at that door, that house was made out of the ship. You know, just things like that. It was incredible to be able to start digging. And that's why I love talking to locals. Somebody had recently asked me, why do you really talk to locals? Because it's all handed down information. So yeah, you have to take the facts with a grain of salt, but they're able to point you in directions and share family stories that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And I knocked at this one gentleman's door who allegedly had a door from the Hungarian. I just walked up. I'm like, I hear you have a door from the Hungarian. And he's like, yeah, you want to see it? I'm like, yeah. And he takes me into his barn. It's buried. Things are piled on top of it. It's painted. It had been painted green. And he's like, I don't know what to do with it. And I just bought it off of him. And that's it, at the bottom right. It's from the saloon, from the first-class dining saloon of the Hungarian. It's incredible. And the stories that he said he was in love with this door. It was his great-grandfather, or however many greats, he was getting up there in years too, who pulled it out of the wreck, because they all descended on it and picked stuff off of it. And he said he hung it up in the house, and the house was passed down through generations until it became his grandfather's house. And he kept asking his grandfather for that door. He's like, can I please have that door? And his grandfather's like, you'll get it when I die. And then the house caught fire and was burning down to the ground. And this guy told me he ran into the house and took the door off the hinges and ran out with it. So not only did this door survive a sinking ship, it survived a burning house. So, as Colin had just said in the chat, that he loves the glass pattern still there. It's leaded glass. The backside had been painted, which unfortunately damaged a lot of the original colors, but you can still see traces. Saloon is still perfectly clear on it. You can even see that in the photograph. But as you can see, some of the panes are missing. And he told me, as far as he's aware, that was damage done during the sinking. That is not from the years since. That was blown out when the ship went down. And it has the hardware, it has the doorknobs, and it has extra carvings. You can see some empty panels. It has about 50% of the missing panels. Beautiful, beautiful piece. And like I said, it's in my collection. I have a large collection of artifacts from many different ships. And I put them in my videos not to flaunt it. I always feel uncomfortable, actually. I kind of get self-conscious about boasting and all. But I put them into my videos because I don't like them just sitting in a storage unit. I want people to see it. I would love to lend them to museums, but in the meantime, I want to share them in videos. So that's the story of the Hungarian, and that's where, that's just one of the things that we did. We put together the animations recreating it, and we learned quite a few things when working on this, when doing those animations, because we knew the tides, we knew how the water rose, because it didn't necessarily sink. It hit the rock and sank immediately on the rock, on the ledge, which was submerged, but it didn't go under. The water was only up to the saloon deck, so when she immediately sank, that door was probably half underwater inside the ship. And the door was on the top deck inside the hull, and then there was a deck on top. So she sank, and then the tide rose, and that put her under. And that took the rising tide with the storm continuing, took the masts down. The survivors were climbing up into the rigging, and they watched from the shore as the water rose and the waves battered it. And they just watched over a few hours. One mast falls, and all those people go into the sea. And then another mast falls, and the funnel falls. And then finally the last mast falls, and that's it. But we were able to take the tide information and rise the water properly. But we were able to find out, we knew the saloon door was halfway underwater by putting this into a 3D environment and seeing where that water rises with the proper depth at the proper tide, with the proper dimensions on the ship. So these 3D recreations, it's digital archaeology. It's bringing these stories back and learning things that were never known, that you wouldn't discover unless you were... This is the closest you can get to being there watching it. You just put the right numbers in, you get some phenomenal artists who know how to be faithful to the subject matter, and then you sit down with historians who know what they're talking about, and it all comes back to life. So that's the story of the Hungarian. Let's jump over to the next slide. I know we're a little over time, so I'm gonna wrap it up. But we don't just do documentaries. We have many documentaries, well over 100 on my channel. You can go watch it, YouTube, Part-Time Explorer for free. But we also are developing virtual museums. That's a concept that we're pioneering, where you take the technology of video games, which is what's powering these animations to begin with, but you take the format of a video game where you play and explore and control it with your computer, and we put you into a historical environment, and that's what we are doing with the RMS Lusitania. Our museum experience is called Lusitania, the Greyhound's Wake. Let's jump on over to the next slide. I can't remember if I did 1 or 2 slides of the Lusitania, but these are some images. We did a companion book. All right, it's just one. We did a companion 2-volume book called Lusitania, an illustrated biography. So a lot of the renders that you see are from the experience, but framed specifically for the books. So these are a hybrid of book and experience that you're looking at right here. But you walk the ship, and you learn about it in a museum. You see it sink. You hear the stories of the people who were there. You learn about the construction, the career. You get a first-hand experience of this ship like never before. And we are taking our time to do it right. There's others who are slapping some together. We're taking the time to tell it right, to work with historians, to work with divers, to work with people, naval architects, to make sure that what we build is the Lusitania, that it makes sense, that it's faithful, because again, as I said at the beginning, we feel that this is a burden, a good burden, where we have to tell it right. We feel the weight of the importance of getting things done right. So there it is. It's called Lusitania, Greyhound's Wake, and we're still working on it. We've been working on it. Don't know when it'll be done, but we have jobs and documentaries to make too. So, well, that's it. We can jump over to the last slide. As I said, we have 2 books. They are available, and they show those beautiful renders that you've seen, and they also go into the complete history of the infamous RMS Lusitania. They're available at atlanticliners.com, published by the History Press. And yeah, our team wrote it. Our historians and me and Levi, my lead developer, we wrote it. And if you want to check out my Patreon as well, Part-Time Explorer, my YouTube is Part-Time Explorer, and we also have a sister YouTube channel called Steam and Splendor, which is run by the historians on my team. If you want to check that out as well, Steam and Splendor on YouTube. So that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. How fascinating. I will say, for anybody who has a chance, if you can get a view, it's online, of his sort of tour of the Lusitania. Oh my God, it is phenomenal. I mean, the main dining hall alone is worth the time to view it. And having said that, there we have a little bit of time for some questions here. And Greg asks, can you hint at what your next shipwreck video may be?
Actually, this is not the next one, but it's the one I'm working on right now. Steamboat Sultana. We're hoping to have that out in the next month. We do have another one that will be coming out hopefully in the next 2 weeks. We're putting the finishing touches on it, and it's a wreck that you've never heard of. I've never heard of it until I bought an artifact from it, and I looked at it. It has a. I'm really getting into wrecks that no one's heard of. Sultana is not. Everyone's heard of the Sultana, but I just love the mystery of what can we uncover. I bought a plate that was pulled off of a wreck, and on the back is a sticker that says recovered from this ship on this date by this person. And I'd never heard of it. Google has hardly heard of it. And that was a challenge. Like, all right, what can we find on this? So we put together a little something.
That's extremely cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Tom, thank you so much. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? I guess not. Tom, I just can't thank you enough for the time you spent with us. And more importantly, for the effort you put in to make these things come alive and really analyze what happened, when, and who was along. And thank you. There you go.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me. And of course, thank you to everybody who tuned in.